So imagine opening your kitchen pantry, right? But instead of, just looking for a quick mid-afternoon snack, you are stepping onto a literal cosmic
Oh,
battlefield.
yeah. That is exactly what it is.
Right. Like every ingredient on the shelf, every piece of meat in the freezer, it all carries this massive life or death significance. The mundane act of making a sandwich suddenly becomes this act of profound theological alignment. So, welcome to today's deep dive. But actually, before we unpack this fascinating ancient worldview, I really want to offer a very sincere divine blessing for your day today and for your entire week ahead. May you find peace, clarity, and purpose in whatever you are tackling right now. We are so genuinely glad you are here with us.
We really are. And it is wonderful to have you joining the conversation. We have a topic today that is, well, it's going to completely challenge how you think about the food on your plate.
It really is. Because today we are diving into Leviticus chapter 11. And I mean, if you're familiar with the text, reading ancient biblical dietary laws usually sounds about as thrilling as reading a 3,000-year-old health inspector's manual.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly dense.
Yeah, it's just paragraph after paragraph of, don't touch this and don't eat that and wash your clothes until evening.
It definitely suffers from a reputation of being pretty dry. I mean, on the surface, it reads like an exhausting, almost arbitrary list of ancient bureaucratic regulations, just designed to make daily life incredibly tedious.
But the sources we are using today, the detailed study notes and texts from the Holman and NWA study Bibles, they just crack this whole thing wide open.
They really do. It's a completely different perspective.
Right, because our mission today isn't just to memorize some, trivia list of what an ancient Israelite could or couldn't put on their dinner plate. We want to uncover the absolute underlying logic.
Exactly. The why behind it all.
Yeah, we're going to explore how food, which is, something so universal and basic to human survival, was utilized as a tool to literally construct a nation's identity from the ground up.
That is the core of it. We are not looking at the what so much as the why. Because once you understand the why, you realize that these ancient people weren't just arbitrarily pointing at animals and banning them.
Right.
They were mapping out their entire understanding of creation, order, and chaos, and applying it to their daily diet.
So to understand that map, we kind of have to start from the ground up. Let's look at how the ancient Israelites categorized the animal kingdom, starting with the land.
Okay, yeah.
Because to figure out what was allowed, we really need to define their anatomy of normal.
Right. And for the land mammals, the text establishes a very strict two-part anatomical criterion. For an animal to be considered clean, which simply meant it was acceptable for an Israelite to eat it, had to meet both requirements simultaneously.
Not just one.
Exactly, not just one. First, it had to have completely split hooves, and second, it had to chew the cud, which is, the biological process of a ruminant animal digesting its food in multiple stomach chambers.
Okay, so that means your standard barnyard animals pass the test. Like a cow, a sheep, a goat. They check both of those boxes completely.
They do, and those animals form the baseline. But the text spends a significant amount of time detailing the exceptions.
The near misses, basically.
Exactly. These are the animals that only meet one of the two criteria. And because they fall short, they are strictly forbidden.
Like the camel, right. I mean, a camel chews the cud, but if you look at its foot, it doesn't have a truly divided hoof. It has like a padded foot.
Right.
And then you have the rock badger, which some of our sources refer to as a coney or an argonaz. And the hare, they appear to have a chewing motion that resembles chewing the cud, but they definitely do not have split hooves.
Yeah, so they're instantly disqualified. And that leads us to the most famous exception on the entire list, which is the pig.
Ah, the pig.
Right. The pig has perfectly split hooves, but it does not chew the cud. It completely lacks the internal digestive mechanism of a ruminant. So it falls firmly into the unclean category.
Got it. And then if we shift our gaze from the pasture to the water, the rules for aquatic life are almost shockingly straightforward.
Oh, very simple compared to the land animals.
Yeah, to be considered clean, a sea creature just needs fins and scales. Anything else swimming or crawling in the water that lacks one or both of those features is considered what the Hebrew calls shekets.
Which translates to an abomination.
An abomination.
Right.
So that single rule eliminates a massive swath of marine life.
It really does. I mean, all shellfish, crabs, lobsters, eels, sharks, catfish,
Yeah.
if it occupies the water but lacks the standard fins and scales, it is fundamentally incompatible with the Israelite diet.
Okay, so a lot of people look at this and think it just sounds like, I don't know, arbitrary gatekeeping. like a VIP club where the bouncer is hyper-fixated on a very specific dress code.
That's a funny way to put it, but yeah.
But the more I looked at the sources, the more I realized we need a better framework. It reminds me less of a set of random rules and more like how the human immune system functions.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy.
Yeah, like an immune system is programmed to recognize what a healthy human cell looks like. If a virus enters the body, it might mimic some of the surface markers of a healthy cell, like a pig having a split hoof, but internally it lacks the right DNA.
Right, right.
So the immune system recognizes it as an anomaly and attacks it to preserve the body's order. But my question is, why did God program this specific ancient immune system around split hooves and scales?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal way to frame it because it perfectly aligns with the theory presented in the NLAA study notes. The notes describe this underlying logic as conformity to the norm.
Conformity to the norm. Okay.
Yes. You have to place yourself in the mindset of an ancient Israelite pastoralist. For them, the absolute standard of a normal land animal was a domesticated herd animal.
Like the cow, the sheep, the goat.
Exactly. Those animals were the pure standard of creation. They represented order and domesticity. And what do they all share? They have split hooves, and they are peaceful vegetarians that chew the cud.
So that specific combination of traits became the archetype of what a land animal was supposed to be in a perfectly ordered world?
Yes, exactly.
So anything that deviates from that archetype isn't just an oddity, it's like a structural threat to the established order.
You're touching on something crucial here. An animal that didn't fit the mold was seen as a creature that blurred the boundaries of creation. Let's go back to the pig for a second.
Okay.
Out of all the hoofed animals on their radar, the pig is the only one that is an omnivore. It eats everything, including refuse, and it doesn't chew the cud. In the conceptual map, a pig is a boundary breaker.
Wow.
Yeah, it is structurally abnormal. In this ancient worldview, things that are mixed, blurred, or abnormal represent chaos. And chaos is intrinsically impure.
That is so fascinating. And that reframes the entire concept of the seafood rules, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we are looking for conformity to the norm, a normal fish uses fins to propel itself and has scales for armor. But an eel acts exactly like a snake, but it lives in the water.
Right, it's confusing its environment.
Yeah. And an oyster behaves like a rock, but it's alive. A lobster has legs like an insect, but it scuttles across the ocean floor. They're all blurring the boundaries of their domain.
The ancient mind looked at an eel and saw a creature suffering from an identity crisis. If it couldn't conform to the proper structural rules of its environment, consuming it would mean internalizing that same chaos.
Okay, so if the land and sea animals were judged heavily on their physical conformity to a standard, what happens when we look up?
The birds.
Yeah, because as the text moves to the creatures of the sky, the whole conformity framework seems to just evaporate. The rules of gravity don't apply in the sky, and suddenly the text abandons anatomical rules altogether.
It is a really stark transition. Leviticus 11 offers no equivalent to split hooves or fins and scales for the birds. Instead of giving a structural guideline, it simply drops a highly specific ban list.
And it is a dark list. We're talking eagles, vultures, falcons, ravens, ostriches, owls, storks, herons.
It really is.
And surprisingly, bats get lumped in here as well, categorized broadly as winged creatures of the sky.
Right. And when you analyze that specific grouping of forbidden birds, a glaring common denominator emerges. The Holman study notes explicitly highlight this.
What is it?
Almost all of these birds are birds of prey, or they are scavengers. They are carrion eaters.
So we've shifted from animals that look chaotic to animals that are intimately associated with death.
Precisely.
These are birds that sustain their own life by consuming the blood and the carcasses of other creatures.
And in the Israelite theological system, death is the ultimate, absolute source of impurity. God is the author of life. Therefore, death is the anti-God state.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, so if you consume a creature that literally builds its physical form out of the flesh of dead things, you are bringing the ultimate impurity into your own body. You are defiling yourself at the deepest possible level.
Wow. Which brings us crashing down to the dirt. Because the text goes from the majestic soaring birds of prey down to the bugs and the swarming, creeping...
The creeping things.
And the general rule given is that winged insects that walk on four legs are abominations. But I actually want to challenge the logic here a bit because the text carves out what looks like a massive arbitrary loophole.
You're talking about the grasshoppers.
Yes, locusts, grasshoppers, and crickets are specifically allowed to be eaten. Why does a grasshopper get a free pass just because it has jointed legs for jumping? It feels like a technicality just to let them keep eating a common desert snack, you know?
I mean, it does look like a convenient loophole at first glance, but the study notes pull us back into that ancient psychological framework. It returns to the concept of a creature having the proper movement for its specific domain.
Proper movement.
Yeah. For a swarming winged insect, leaping and hopping off the ground was considered its intended, ordered mode of locomotion. The jointed legs allowed it to separate itself from the dirt.
Ah, so it's about escaping the dirt. Because insects that just scurry along the ground are lumped in with the creeping things, the mice, the lizards, the snakes.
Exactly. Think about the theological weight of the dirt in this worldview. The ground, the dust, is the realm of the grave. It's the underworld.
Oh, wow.
Creatures that slither on their bellies or scurry low to the earth are permanently tethered to the realm of death. It echoes all the way back to the curse of the serpent in Genesis, being condemned to crawl on its belly and eat dust. To the ancient Israelite, scurrying was the locomotion of the cursed.
That explains why the text suddenly treats these creeping things as though they are radioactive. Like, it's not just that you can't eat a mouse or a dead lizard. The text introduces a level of contagious impurity that reads almost like a modern biohazard protocol.
Contagious is the perfect descriptor there. The impurity doesn't just stick to the dead animal, it actively seeks to transmit itself.
Right.
If an Israelite even brushed against the carcass of a weasel or a lizard, they became unclean until the evening and had to undergo ritual washing. But the contagion was so aggressive that it heavily contaminated objects too.
And this is where the daily practical burden of this worldview becomes staggering. I mean, imagine you are an ancient Israelite farmer. If a dead lizard falls onto your wooden bowl or your clothing, that object is ruined for the day.
Right, you have to submerge it in water and wait until the sun goes down.
But if that dead lizard falls into your clay oven or an unglazed pottery vessel, washing it isn't an option. The text says you have to physically smash the oven to pieces. You have to destroy the pot.
That represents a massive economic loss for an ancient family.
It really does. I mean, clay was porous. The ancient mind understood that the impurity of death didn't just sit on the surface of the clay. It seeped into the very molecular structure of the oven.
It was permanently corrupted.
But the detail in the sources that absolutely fascinated me was the physics of the contagion when it came to seeds.
Oh, the distinction between wet seed and dry seed.
Yeah.
It is a brilliant piece of ancient observation.
Right, because the rule states that if a dead mouse falls onto a pile of dry seed that you have set aside for planting, the seed is totally fine. You just brush the mouse off and the seed is clean.
Yep.
But if you had poured water on that seed to prepare it and then the carcass falls onto it, the entire batch of seed becomes instantly unclean and has to be thrown away. Why is water the activating ingredient for impurity?
Well, it demonstrates an incredible understanding of biology wrapped inside a theological lesson. When a seed is dry, it is in a dormant state.
Okay.
Its external boundaries are sealed and closed off from the world. The impurity of the dead mouse just bounces off the hard exterior.
That makes sense.
But when you introduce water, the seed softens. It begins to absorb. The water acts as a literal conduit, carrying the essence of the dead animal, the impurity of death itself, straight into the permeable heart of the seed.
So the water acts as a transport system for the corruption, which actually makes another rule in the text seem completely contradictory at first. Because if water transports impurity into a seed, but then if a dead carcass falls into a running spring or a massive underground water cistern, the water source remains totally clean.
Right, only the person who reaches in to pull out the dead body contracts the impurity.
Yeah. Why wouldn't a dead animal permanently ruin a town's entire water supply?
To understand that, the NAA notes require us to look at the harsh geographical reality of the ancient Near East. In that environment, water was the absolute most vital, scarce resource in existence. Entire civilizations lived or died based on a single well.
Wow, yeah.
Beyond that, water was the primary agent used by the Israelites for ritual purification.
So if a single dead mouse could permanently contaminate a massive community cistern, the entire town would literally face death by dehydration.
Yes, or they will be trapped in a permanent state of spiritual impurity with no way to wash.
Which is exactly the opposite of God's intent.
Exactly. Therefore, a naturally flowing spring or an immense life-giving cistern was understood to possess such an overwhelming active force of life that it simply consumed and neutralized the impurity of the carcass.
That is so cool.
The living water cleanses itself. The sheer volume of life overpowers the small element of death.
Life overpowers death. That is a beautiful theological principle hidden inside like a plumbing regulation.
It really is.
But let's take a step back and look at the big picture here. Because constantly checking your clothes for dead bugs and policing your pantry and smashing your expensive clay ovens because a gecko fell in them, that sounds physically and mentally exhausting.
Oh, absolutely exhausting.
And it leads to the ultimate why. For the longest time, a popular modern theory has been that God was basically acting as a divine physician, handing down the world's oldest health code to protect the Israelites from trichinosis and salmonella before humanity knew what germs were.
Yeah, it is an incredibly pervasive assumption today.
Yeah.
Modern readers love to retroactively project scientific validation onto ancient texts. We want the Bible to read like a 21st century medical journal. But the Holman study notes explicitly dismantle this hygiene myth.
They are very clear about it. They point out that while there may have been some incidental happy accidents where avoiding a certain scavenger protected someone from a parasite, physical health was not the driving mechanism of the law.
No, not at all.
If you look at the biology, a camel is not inherently more toxic or dangerous to consume than a cow, provided you cook the meat.
Exactly. If the ultimate goal of Leviticus was pure physical health and caloric intake, the permitted menu would look vastly different. The true purpose was entirely theological, not medical.
Right.
And the NAA notes provide a phenomenal visual framework for understanding this, detailing what they call the spectrum of holiness and impurity.
Yes. That chart in the study notes completely shifted my perspective. It maps out their entire conceptual universe on a sliding scale.
Imagine a cosmic spectrum. At the absolute highest end of this scale, you have holiness and life. This is the exclusive realm of God himself. It encompasses the sanctuary, the officiating priests, and the unblemished sacrificial animals. It is pure, radiating life.
So on this end of the spectrum, holiness and life are basically synonyms.
They are intertwined. Then if you move to the middle of the spectrum, you find the clean or pure category.
Okay.
This is the realm of everyday normalcy. It's the space occupied by the average Israelite citizen going about their day, and it's where the clean animals, the cud-chewing cows, the sheep, the fish with scales reside.
That is a crucial distinction. Being clean doesn't mean you are holy. It just means you are neutral. You are in a proper state of order, which makes you fit to participate in the community and fit to approach the holy sanctuary without causing a dangerous clash of states.
That is spot on. Neutrality allows for relationship with the holy. But then you move to the far opposite end of the spectrum.
The dark end.
Yes. Here you find impurity and death. This is the realm of human corpses, disease, dead animal carcasses, and the unclean animals we've been discussing. The predators, the scavengers, the structural anomalies that break the boundaries of order.
So if we take that massive cosmic spectrum and apply it to an Israelite family trying to prepare a Tuesday afternoon lunch, what does this all mean?
Right.
Like, if this wasn't about avoiding cholesterol and it was about mapping the cosmos, was God just giving them an exhausting daily memory test to make sure they were paying attention?
It was far more profound than a memory test. It was about deep, continuous, inescapable identity formation. The foundational theological logic of Leviticus 11 is explicitly stated in the text itself, "Be holy, for I am holy."
Right.
And we have to remember that the Hebrew root word for holy, kodash, essentially means to be separated or set apart for a specific
It's set
goal.
apart. That changes the weight of the word completely.
The study sources emphasize this connection beautifully. Think about the Exodus. God separated the nation of Israel from all the other surrounding nations of the earth. He literally pulled them out of the slavery and chaos of Egypt to be his exclusive covenant people.
So because their spiritual identity was separated, their physical daily reality had to mirror that separation.
Exactly. They were required to separate their food just as God had separated them.
That is heavy. It means that every single time an ancient Israelite sat down to eat a meal multiple times a day, they couldn't just operate on autopilot.
No, they couldn't.
They couldn't just grab whatever wild game was available in the desert, and they certainly couldn't just sit down and share a roasted pig with their pagan neighbors.
Absolutely not.
They had to stop. They had to intellectually evaluate their food against the spectrum of life and death. They had to make a highly conscious choice.
Eating ceased to be merely about biological refueling. These dietary laws elevated the incredibly mundane everyday act of eating into a daily tangible devotion. It was a physical reminder ingrained into their chewing and swallowing that they belonged to someone else. They were people uniquely set apart. They couldn't accidentally assimilate into the surrounding Canaanite cultures because they couldn't even share a basic meal with them without actively breaking their covenant with God.
It was like a cultural boundary wall, and the bricks were made of food.
Yes.
It forced them to remember who they were every time their stomach rumbled.
Yeah.
Tracing that ancient boundary line brings us right up to the present moment, because the Holman notes address the elephant in the room for modern readers.
Which is, of course, that these specific, highly detailed dietary laws, the rules about split hooves, fish scales, and avoiding rock badgers, are no longer binding for Christians today.
Right. The New Testament text explicitly shifts the theological focus away from these external food regulations.
The specific menus and the threat of contagious clay ovens are obsolete for the modern Christian. But, and this is the absolute crucial takeaway, synthesized from the sources, the underlying theological principle remains completely permanent.
What's the principle?
The principle is that a life dedicated to God is not compartmentalized. It starts from the inside out, and it insists that our everyday, seemingly mundane choices matter immensely.
The idea that your faith shouldn't just be a high-minded abstract concept you think about while sitting in a pew once a week.
Exactly.
It should be a living reality that actually governs your daily habits, the associations you make, and the boundaries you draw around your life.
The ancient Israelites used their dinner plates to express their devotion and to actively separate themselves from the chaos of the world around them. It was a mechanism for mindfulness.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive. If you don't have to check your groceries for split hooves or jointed jumping legs anymore, what is your modern equivalent of a dietary law?
That's a great question.
Right. Think about your own daily routines. Think about the media you casually consume, the digital habits you form, the way you spend your time. What boundaries or rules do you intentionally set for yourself today, not to be a health nut and not to prove you're better than anyone else, but to actively remind yourself of who you are, what you value, and what you stand for in an increasingly chaotic, boundaryless world? How do you set yourself apart?
That is the exact question the text demands of us. It was never truly about the menu. It was always about the mindfulness of who you belong to.
I think that is the perfect place to land. Well, that is all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you so much for exploring this ancient, incredibly complex, and ultimately beautiful worldview with us. We hope it gave you a completely new perspective. As we close today, I just want to say, exactly as promised, God blesses all the listeners.